I'm absolutely delighted to see so many of you back. I distinctly remember last time when I finished, a sister said, well, next week we're going to have the same speaker back to talk about history. Well, she didn't say that. Okay. And I was kind of thinking, is that a subtle hint for you guys to not come back this week? When we talk about history, it's like, history. And perhaps that's the reason why Pastor Ian is here today, to check up on me. Whom have I invited? What is he doing to my congregation? But I'm going to go on with history, part 2, with no apologies. Why? Because, like I said last time, there is so much to be learned in history. Remember, Constantine, who co-opted Christianity into his empire, and then the whole movement slowed down. What can we learn from that? As we look at the Christian nationalism that we are seeing south of the border, what are the implications for us today? Why did the gospel spread like wildfire during the first century? Not because of Constantine, but because of the lay people. The people were battered and scattered, and they went to different parts of the world, and they took with them the gospel. They lived it out as well. That's why the gospel spread the way it did. What are the implications for us today? What about the wonderful people that God has called out of the dark and chaotic times in the subsequent centuries? We also live in a dark and chaotic time. Could we be the people that God is calling to continue his mighty work ahead of us? What about the 4 structures, the 4 mechanisms that we talked about? Remember the voluntary go, the involuntary go, the voluntary come, and the involuntary come. Throughout church history, God has been using these 4 mechanisms for us to share the gospel with others. And it's still happening today. Do we have our eyes on how the Lord is working through these 4 mechanisms and minister to the people around us? There are lots of implications for us today. There are also mistakes that we can learn from. The earlier generation of missionaries, they were riding on the political conquest of the colonizers. Are we capable of doing the same thing today? Even as Asian missionaries, we are. Because big parts of Asia are now booming. And we can easily repeat the same mistake and force our culture, force our way of doing things, and force our ways of thinking into the people that we are trying to minister to. What about the crusade? Do we have the tendency to ram the truth down people's throat? Or do we have a better way to do it? By following Christ's way. You are a chosen people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, God's special possession, that you may declare the praises of him who called you out of darkness into his wonderful light. We are all called into that mission. What can we learn from history? Both successes and failures. As we go into part 2 of the series, as we zoom in, I'm not talking about the application that we're using, as we zoom in on the last era, the last few hundred years of church history, on the iconic missionaries and what they were able to do in the power of the Lord. Why don't we focus our mind on that? What can we learn from these people and what they have done and bring it to the day that we live in? So, let me go into some historical backdrops before I go into these few hundred years. Reformation and Industrial Revolution, the 2 incidents were closely tied together. The Industrial Revolution has brought a lot of advancements in terms of technology and everything, and that's why we have AC, we have like lightings and everything. Lots of blessings. But it's also turned big parts of Britain and even Europe into spiritual and moral slums. Because now people are feeling that they no longer need the Lord. By the grace of the Lord, he raised some key people to bring about revivals on that continent. John Wesley was one of those he was able to use. And when it started, the aim has always been to evangelize, to proclaim the gospel, and to civilize, to work out the gospel. The two have always been hand in hand. I'm privileged to be part of Lausanne 4 last year. And this is what we focus on during that Congress, to declare and display Christ together in vocal and visible ways. When you look at words like declare and vocal, it kind of draws you to the proclamation part of the gospel. When you look at words like display and visible, it draws you to the civilization part of the gospel. Now, of course, by civilization, we mean Christian civilization, as opposed to just Western civilization. So when the movement first started, it's always been both. It's always been like two wings of a plane. They go hand in hand together. And we should not do one at the expense of the other. We'll come back to this later in this message. To help you understand more about the impact of the revival movements that John Wesley has started, I would like you to hear not from me, but from a well-known historian by the name of Edwin Orr. F.F. Bruce, some of you may recognize that name. He's a Bible commentator. Here's how he described Edwin Orr. He said, some men read history, some write it, and others make it. But so far as the history of religious revivals is concerned, J. Edwin Orr belongs to all three categories. So hear from him about the aftermath of the revival movement. Ready? Sound. What am I doing wrong? I've turned up the volume. What about the volume at the back?
Unmute. It worked last time. I don't know what happened this time.
Share sound?
I did share sound, I think. Let me check that again, if you guys don't mind. Okay, so let me get back to my Zoom. Am I still on Zoom? Or have I disappeared somehow? Okay. I did share sound. Share. And okay. So technical snack. What else is new? But no problem. Well, it's cranked up as high as it can. And
It's a laptop.
don't
worry. I'm Edwin Orr. Okay, yeah. Essentially what he said was, after the revival, the culture has been so cleaned up that the police was left with nothing to do. They were supposed to be maintaining orders, right? But everything was good. There was no crime, no nothing. So what did they end up doing? They formed a quartet to sing in these gospel concerts. And production slows down because the horses
and all the animals that they were using, they were so used to the foul language that the people were using before the revival. And after the revival, everyone cleaned up their language. And so the horses and the cattle, they did not understand what was going on. And so production actually slowed down. You might feel that I'm telling you some tall tales, but they're not. Edwin Orr was able to document it from history. That's the effect of the revival. And the Protestant missions movement was birthed out of these awakenings. One of them, who was affected, happens to be Hudson Taylor, the guy who started the organization that I'm now working for, happens to be his great-grandfather. He was a contemporary of John Wesley. We talk about John Wesley quite fondly today. But you know what? During his time, he wasn't a very popular person at all. Who wants to hear that everything that they're doing is evil, is wrong? And so for that reason, people didn't like him. And Hudson Taylor's great-grandfather was one of those. So one time, John Wesley's circuit rider meaning itinerant preachers, came to his town. And he went to join the event with rotten eggs and tomatoes all over. And his sole desire was to be tossing these things at the circuit rider. Now, I don't know what he actually did on that day, but something he heard from the circuit rider, for some reason, just stuck to him, just like that. And it's this verse. As for me and my family, we will serve the Lord. He didn't know why, but this verse just kept ringing in his ears. Later on, he was preparing for his wedding. He was about to be married. The morning before the wedding, he was still struggling with this verse. So he chose to go out to an open field and wrestle with the Lord. At the end of that wrestling, he came to know the Lord, and he became a believer. A few generations after, we see Hudson Taylor, who started a full-blown movement all by himself. That's how powerful the revivals were. Today, we'll, like I said, zoom in on the four iconic figures and the three missions eras in the last few hundred years. We'll be looking at William Carey, who took the gospel beyond the backwaters of Europe to the continents. And then we'll see James Hudson Taylor. William Carey and people from his time, they were able to share the gospel with people from, on all the other continents, and they thought their job was done. And they thought they could now just sit there and wait for the Lord to come back again. Hudson Taylor was the one who noticed that in these continents, yes, the coastal regions have been reached, but not so the inland places, the harder places. And so he started an inland missions movement. And then even when the inlands were reached, again people were thinking, oh, Jesus will come back again. Just sit there and wait. People noticed that even in the inland, although there were churches already, but there are different people groups who speak different languages, who have different cultures, who are still vastly unreached. And so they start the third era. William Carey is widely looked upon as the father of modern missions. It's not like he was the first one doing missions after the Reformation. The Reformation happened in 1517. Before him, there were some forerunners, like the Quakers. When I say the Quakers, what do you think of? Cereals, oatmeal, cold or hot, right? Okay, well, it's very much that. But it's also a Christian movement. You know why they're called Quakers? Because in the middle of their religious experience, they start trembling their bodies. And that's why they're called the Quakers. Today, we call these people quietists. They do not believe in rites or creeds, any structures, but they believe in the inner light. They believe in spiritual experience. And they are also at the front line promoting peace and social justice. They did a lot of good things, but unfortunately, it did not hold for long. And I'll tell you why. Remember the two structures that we talked about last time. Okay, the modality structure, the home structure, and the sodality structure, the sand structure. During this time, the reformers tossed the baby out with the bathwater. They saw how corrupt the sodality structure has become under the Roman Catholic Church. And so they tossed it out. Okay, and for the first 200s, they were too busy cleaning up doctrinal issues within the Reformed community. And so they were down to just this one chopstick, the home, the modality structure. And people like the Quakers, they were using this one chopstick. They can't pick up anything, right? That's why it was not too effective. That was the 1600s. Let me get that, because I need that. I tossed it away, not the reformers. Sorry, reformers. And then in the 1700s, we see the Moravians. Fascinating people, let me tell you. They were a group of refugees from Bohemia, which is now Czech. Under persecution, they went to Austria, which is Germany today. Why were they refugees? How did they become refugees? Well, because they followed the teaching of a guy called John Hus. We've all heard of Martin Luther, but few of you, maybe, have heard of John Hus. He's like the precursor of the early reformers. But because he wasn't very well received at all, actually, he was persecuted, he was killed. And so these people who followed John Hus's teaching, they were also under persecution in Bohemia or Czech. And so they had to go to Austria, and they lived there as refugees. They came under a guy called Count Zinzendorf. And under his leadership, this small church grew as a refugee church. It's a church that has caught the passion for missions, and that passion has never left them. And so they started a prayer chain, now catch this, for 100 years, 100 years, 24/7. You guys have midweek prayer meetings? You do? How many showed up? Okay, well, I don't need an answer. Okay, and how long did it last for? After 45 minutes, it's like, oh wow. These are people who prayed for 100 years non-stop, 24/7. And God honors that. So for the first 25 years, they sent 100 missionaries. And 2 of their first missionaries were ready to sell themselves into slavery so that they can minister to the slaves. Now you have to remember, these are Eastern Europeans. They're white, they're Caucasians. Okay, and most of the slaves at the time were colored people, looked down upon. And they were ready to sell themselves into slavery and live as one of them in order to share the gospel with them. That's the kind of sacrifice that they are ready to make for the sake of the gospel. Within 150 years, they sent out 2,158 missions to different parts of the world. And they would say, when they were sent out, they would say, there's no need for fanfare at all. Don't put us up on a pedestal. We are just doing what every believer is supposed to do. That's the Moravians. But again, because they did not have the sodality structure, all they had was the modality structure, it did not become a long-lasting movement. William Carey came on the scene. He was an Englishman. He was a school teacher, a part-time pastor, and a shoemaker. A lot of the most effective pastors that I have met in my life are actually bivocational pastors or even lay pastors because they are so much closer to the people that they serve. Now, there's a rightful place for people like us, pastors and missionaries. But God is able to use some of these people mightily in history. He ended up going to India in 1793. Reformation happened in 1517. Why the delay? We talked about it. Because the early reformers tossed away this structure. He was learning from the secular trading companies of his time, like the East India Company. And they would send out their people to other parts of the world, unexplored parts of the world, to find business opportunities. He said, well, we as Christians, we've got something way better than these merchandise for the rest of the world. Why are we not doing what they are doing? Luke 16:8 came to mind. For the people of this world are more shrewd in dealing with their own kind than are the people of the light. When the idea first came up, this is what he was told. Sit down, young man. When God chooses to win the heathen, he will do it without your help or ours. Let me tell you, these ultra-Calvinists, well, I'm a Calvinist too, but these ultra-Calvinists, they really get on my nerve. Yes, God is able to do it all by himself, but out of his grace, out of his love, he's chosen to involve people like us. But believe it or not, at the time, the common view on the Great Commission, Matthew 28:18-20, is that it only applies to the first apostles and not the later believers. In response to that, William Carey wrote a book in early 1790. Here's the title of the book. Here's the title, not the book itself. Ready? An inquiry into the obligations of Christians to use means for the conversion of the heathens, in which the religious state of the different nations of the world, the success of former undertakings, and the practicability of further undertakings are considered. It is, but it's typical of titles back in those days. Today, even one word is too long. He started a wave of movement that would take the gospel to the different continents. And that movement spread to the United States. And from there, we see prototypes of student volunteer movements. You're looking at a haystack in one of the bottom pictures. This is what's called the haystack movement. A group of university students, they felt led to pray. And yet there were lots of anti-religious feelings on campus. And so they had to do their prayer outdoor. Halfway through the prayer, the rain came. There was a rainstorm. And so they had to seek shelter, and they found shelter under this haystack. I mean, you guys have seen haystacks, right? Yeah, there are still haystacks here in Markham, actually. Okay, it's like a mound, right? So how do you seek shelter? With this particular haystack, it's a mushroom shape. Why? Because the cows have eaten from the side. And so it's left with like a mushroom. And so they were able to seek shelter under that mushroom. And today, if you go to that place again, you'll see this monument. It's called the Haystack Movement Monument. But lots of students were called into missions. And they were able to do great things for the Lord. Sometimes at great cost to their own personal safety and even their personal life. This era is marked with an astonishing readiness to sacrifice. A mandatory item on the packing list is their own casket. Or these days when we send out missionaries, have you guys sent out any missionaries from out of this church? Have you? Yes? Okay, good. I don't know what you did. Okay? Yeah. But these days in a typical church, when you send out missionaries, you have a beautiful ceremony here. You lay hands on the missionary, right? Yeah. And then you will send them out at nighttime before they go. You take them to a good Chinese restaurant, have a great 8-course, 12-course banquet, right? Yeah. And then in a few years' time, they'll come back and say, oh, wow, time to hear your report. Back in those days, when they sent out missionaries, they were not expected to come back alive. because a lot of them were killed by the locals on the field. Others, they probably caught malaria or other diseases. And so it would make sense for them to pack their own casket. It saves a lot of expenses. And you need space to hold your personal belongings anyways. So put your personal belongings in your casket and just load the whole thing onto the sailboat. You're done. They were ready to do that. Okay. They also came to learn some keen insight into mission strategy. They were doing the proclamational part and also the working out part of missions together, hand in hand, at this stage of the development. Again, more reactions to what he did. People from the East India Company, they said this of William Carey. They said the sending of missionaries into our eastern possession is the maddest, most extravagant, most indefensible project which has ever been suggested by a moonstruck fanatic. How encouraging, eh? Such a scheme is pernicious, imprudent, useless, harmful, dangerous, profitless, fantastic. It strikes against all reason and sound policy. It brings the peace and safety of our possessions into peril. So brothers and sisters, if we feel discouraged by the people around us in following the Lord's calling, in doing what he's calling us to do, join the club. It's always been like that. Our prayer is that we won't be those people who are discouraging others who are pursuing God's calling. William Carey said, expect great things from God. Attempt great things for God. And notice the sequence. You always expect great things from God before you're able to attempt great things for God. The insight into church planting and mission strategy that they've learned during this early time is the 4 Ps. As a missionary, when they're first on a pioneer field, they are pioneers. They are the sage on the stage. They're also the janitor. They're it. But as new believers come about, they become parents, well, parents in a good way, to help these new believers grow to maturity. And when these new believers become mature, they will become the leaders of the church. And the missionaries are there as partners with them. So they are equals. They are on equal footing. As the leadership continues to grow strong, the missionaries will become participants. Like they don't even stick their nose into the locals' business unless they are asked to. So the 4 Ps, the 4 stages of church planting movement. And to this day, we're still following that. We've often said that as missionaries, we are people who build scaffoldings. When there is no permanent structure, we'll just go and set up a scaffolding so that the permanent structure can go up. And when the permanent structure is up, we quickly dismantle ourselves and move to another setting, another location, where we'll set up a scaffolding to build another permanent setting. So we are people who work ourselves out of a job. And in some ways, it's also like parents. I know some of you are young parents. You will see the day coming when the kids grow to maturity and your role changes during different stages of their lives. So that was the first era. That was William Carey. They took the gospel to the continents. And they thought the job was done. But it was not. James Hudson Taylor, this is the guy who started the organization that I'm now a part of. I like showing this picture when I speak in churches. This is a very young Hudson Taylor. He was a dude, as we would call it today. He was dedicated by his parents to the Lord. There was a long story there. I'm not going to repeat that story. I think I've preached on it before. If I have not, I'll be happy to do that again if I'm invited back again after today's sermon. Okay, yeah. But when he heard the call to be a missionary, This is what his pastor, I'm pretty sure it's not Pastor Ian. This is what his pastor said. His pastor said, my boy, as you grow older, you'll become wiser than that. Such an idea would do very well in the days when Christ himself was on earth. Not now. That was the thinking at the time. But he pushed on. He found himself in China for the very first time. He was quickly disillusioned by what he got to experience. But it's during that first trip that he had this conversation with a local believer. The believer, of course, who came to Christ through James Hudson Taylor's ministry. He asked, so how long have you had this wonderful gospel? And Hudson Taylor just pulled something, out of a blank. And he said, a few hundred years. And that guy said, why have you not come sooner? My father passed away without knowing Jesus. So in spite of all the discouragement that he got to experience during his first trip, he kept on. A few years after, he had to go back to Britain because of health issues. One morning, he was supposed to be in a church, and he was. And here's what he said of his experience that morning. He said he was unable to bear the sight of a congregation of 1,000 or more Christian people rejoicing in their own security, while millions were perishing from lack of knowledge. So he wandered out onto the sands alone. And he found himself on Brighton Beach, where he had a dialogue with the Lord. And he was challenged to take the gospel to the inland places of China, the tougher places that no one at the time had the guts to go to. And so he started the China Inland Mission 2 days after that experience. He wrote China's Spiritual Needs and Claims, and China Inland Mission was actually the first faith missions that's independent of denominations. And missionaries are not salaried. Instead, they live on support. And that kind of ethos is still with us to this very day. And that's all of us who work in missions today. This is an early picture of China Inland Missions. What do you think might have raised some eyebrows in this picture? Sorry? Yeah, okay. Yeah. And it's also the way they are dressed. Yeah, I mean, these are Caucasian people, right? I mean, Pastor Ian is Caucasian too, is dressed like us. But this is today. Back in those days, the Westerners were dressed quite differently from the Orientals, right? Yeah, and so this group of people from Britain, they were all dressed like the local Chinese at the time. And so the Westerners, the other Westerners, would look down on them. And they would say, like, we are civilized, genteel people. How come you're dressed like the barbarians, like us Chinese? That's one thing that raised people's eyebrow. What's the other thing? What about the gender mix? You see guys and girls, right? Some of them are married. Some of the ladies were single. And at the time, people would say, what are you doing? Get married first. And then if your husband goes to the missions field, then you follow. Don't come out as singles. A lot of these single female missionaries turn out to be the most effective and the most sacrificial workers on the field. So this is Hudson Taylor, who started an IM, an inland movement. But I would call it an impact or impact. Many other missions were set up because of the inland missions movement that he inspired. We started as China Inland Mission, CIM, but there is African Inland Mission, AIM. There is also Sudan Inland Mission. And these movements were all inspired by Hudson Taylor. You're looking at Eric Liddell, C.T. Studd, and even Billy Graham. If you read the biography of these people, you'll know that at some point in their life, they read Hudson Taylor. And that's why they became who they became in the end. This was a school on 110 College Street. Okay? Guess what this school eventually became? Huh? Well, that's U of T, but there's another good school that I graduated from. Tyndale, that's right. This school became Ontario Bible College and Ontario Theological Seminary, which then became Tyndale. Okay? And the school was set up to train up early missionaries who were called from Canada and from North America. So that's how long-lasting that movement has become. These are Cambridge 7. They also brought a lot of vitality to the missions movement. They would say, never go to China without 100 students going with them. And so they're heavily invested in students because they know how the Lord can use young and passionate students to do his will and his purpose. These are the number of missionaries that were called and the number of people who were ready to stand behind them, even though they're not going to the front line. So that's the second era. And because of that, the gospel was taken to the inland places of different continents. And again, people cross their arms and say, oh wow, our job is done. The Lord will come back very soon. Then Cameron Townsend came on the scene. In 1934, he was in Guatemala. He came across someone in Guatemala who asked him, if your God is so smart, why can't he speak my language? He came to find out that the missionaries of those days, they had developed a people blindness. They were looking at places and they thought, well, we've got a church here, we've got a gospel base here, this continent in the inland. They didn't realize that these places were made up of people groups from different cultural backgrounds and different language backgrounds. And a lot of them did not have a meaningful opportunity to come to know the gospel because everything was done in the main language, not their own language. And so he developed the idea of what we call unreached people groups today, unreached and unengaged people group today. People groups who live in the same place. Think of Canada. Okay, yeah, who came from different parts of the world, who came from different cultural backgrounds, different linguistic backgrounds. Even though we have a strong Canadian church, well, relatively strong Canadian church today, but a lot of the people think of the Tibetans, think of the Uyghurs who are coming. They do not have a church that can share the gospel with them in their own heart language, in their own heart culture. And so inspired by that, he started a missions organization, which is now known as the Wycliffe Bible Translators. It's by far the biggest missions agencies in the world today. Again, early reactions to his idea, don't be a fool. Those Indians aren't worth what it would take to learn their outlandish language and translate the Bible for them. They can't even read anyhow. Let them learn Spanish. They'll kill you. Those jungle tribes are dying out anyways. They kill each other as outsiders with their spears and bows and arrows. If they don't kill you, malaria will get you, or your canoe will upset in the rapids. This is how the people of his time reacted to his idea. What kept him going is Matthew 18:12. What do you think? If a man owns 100 sheep and one of them wanders away, will he not leave the 99 on the hills and go to look for the one that wandered off? It's words like this that kept him going. And he would say in his writing, we dare to sing again with utmost confidence of the mighty faith that laughs at impossibilities and shouts, it shall be done. pray for tasks equal to your powers. Not do not pray for tasks equal to your powers, but powers equal to your tasks. A contemporary of his time, Donald McGravin, he went to India, where there's a caste system. The gospel was effectively shared with people in the lowest caste. And people were going, oh wow, this is great. But because of the caste system, people from the upper caste, they would look at Christianity, they would look at the church, and they would say, well, these are things for the whims. For people in the lower caste, I belong to the upper caste, I'm a Brahmin. I don't need the gospel. And so the church has become very lopsided. Yes, the continent has been reached. Yes, the inland has been reached. And yet, you've still got these people who feel that they don't need the gospel. In Taiwan, we see the reverse. The earlier generation of missionaries, they were all educated people, professionals. And they were very effective in helping people like them come to Christ. And so the church in Taiwan today is made up of highly educated professionals. But because of the hierarchical thinking in that culture, these people have little or no desire to share the gospel with the working class, with the grassroots. And the church become lopsided in the other direction. Donald McGravin noticed that. And he encouraged people to look at these invisible groups, these unreached groups. And he started Fuller School of World Mission. He came up with the idea of a Unimax group. Uni meaning one, max meaning maximum. So this is the largest one single group within which there is no significant barrier for the understanding and acceptance of gospel. Geography is history. And I'm not talking about 2 high school subjects. For us to share the gospel with others, sometimes we have to go across the oceans. But a lot of times we can do it right here. Look beyond the door of this church. There are lots of people from unreached parts of the world right there. I'm proud of this church, where a lot of times I see people coming from different backgrounds. Keep doing what you're doing. Go out of your way to welcome them, to retain them. Geography is history. So how many of these people groups do we have in the world? Joshua Project tells us that there are close to 17,000 of these groups in the world today. And together, they number, I don't even want to read this number, okay? But you're looking at it. In their midst, 7,000 groups were still unreached, in the sense that they do not have a Bible in their own language. They do not have a church that worships in their own language and their own culture. And that's the number of individuals that we're looking at. So to sum up, there are 3 eras within the last few hundred years of church history. Within the Protestant missions history, the first era, like I said last time, I'm saying era, not error, just so you won't hear error. Some of these errors may be errors, but no. Okay? But in the first era, the focus was on the coastlands. The key leader was William Carey, and they were primarily sent from Europe. The question that they were wrestling with at the time was whether or not to go. And then the second era, headed up by people like Hudson Taylor, they moved to the inland areas, and they were predominantly sent from America and Europe. The question that they were wrestling with is no longer whether to go, but where to go. So it's very geography bound. And the third era, and in some way we're still in that era, focuses on the unreached people groups. So instead of asking whether or not to go, where to go, we are now asking whom should we go to? Who are the invisible people that the Lord is calling us to reach out to? Cameron Townsend and Donald McGravin, they headed up this movement. But today, the missionaries are primarily sent not from Europe or America or the West. but from parts of the world that used to be at the receiving end of missions. How encouraging. These movements, they share a lot in common. They all appeal to the Bible as the grounds for the action. That's where everything started from. They showed confidence that world evangelism will be completed. They know that this is a task, a finishable task that the Lord has left us with. They all call for united prayer related to the task. They call for others to be involved in specific and strategic ways to complete the entire task. Now, they have this sodality structure, remember? And they use demographics and population figures to make their case. We stand on the shoulders of these giants. These giants, they all had an inverted homesickness. It's the passion that called that country their home, which was in need of the gospel. So it's not homesick for Canada or homesick for Asia, wherever you guys came from. It's homesick for the places where Christ's name is not yet heard. That's inverted homesickness. And in doing that, they help us to see a reflection of the Lord Jesus Christ. Though he was rich, yet for our sake he became poor, so that we, through his poverty, might become rich. There's something called apostolic passion. You're looking at the original Greek word for the English word witness. And some of you know this. This is martyrs, which is where we get the English word martyr. So to become a witness is more than just sharing the gospel, telling good stories over dim sum. That needs to be done. But at the end of the day, it also calls for sacrifice. It calls for bold proclamation and bold work in the face of hostility. We're here to make a life, not just a living. And in doing that, we are not sacrificing anything. It's a privilege. Remember what the Moravians said? We're just doing what every believer is supposed to do. So don't put us up on a pedestal. And it's also throughout these times that we have seen ebbs and flows between the two sides of missions, the proclamation part and the social outreach part. But eventually, we've come back to that balance, hopefully. Points to ponder. I've given you guys 2 video links, and I hope you've had a chance to watch at least one of them. Okay, I would encourage you to watch it if you haven't done so, and try to think of these things. Do you see justice and compassion ministries as a distraction to the proclamation of the gospel? What, if anything, would you like to see changed in your current church ministry? More on the declare vocal, the proclamation side, or more on the outworking side, the display visible side? I don't know about fuller life as a church, but by and large, we have seen swings between 2 extremes. There was a time when people were so focused on the proclamation part that they see any outworking, any social justice as social justice in the biblical sense, okay, as a distraction to the proclamation of the gospel. But today, in big parts of the Christian community, especially here in the West, we have swung to the other extreme. We'll happily go to a field and help dig wells, build orphans' homes. We fall short of proclaiming the gospel because we don't want to embarrass ourselves. What if these people should reject us? And we become quite shy in doing that. Neither is healthy. We need both. They are 2 wings of the same plane. They go hand in hand. In a culture like today's culture, we need to be reminded that we live in a holistic world. The world is in a holistic mess. And so we need a holistic message to minister to such a broken world. What good is it, my brothers and sisters, if someone claims to have faith but has no deeds? Can such faith save them? Suppose a brother or sister is without clothes and daily food. If one of you says to them, "Go in peace, keep warm and well fed," but does nothing about their physical needs, what good is it? In the same way, faith by itself, if it is not accompanied by action, is dead. So remember, it's both. It's not either at the expense of the other. I'm not going to play this clip, partly because of the technical problem, partly because I've probably shown this clip before. Okay, this is Penn Jillette, a celebrity from down south, and you have to know that he's an atheist. But he said, in his own word, that if you believe that a truck is bearing down the road and your friend is standing in the middle of the road, and in order not to offend him, you do not tell him that. How much do you have to hate him to not share that news with them? How much do you have to hate a person to not share the gospel with them? So proclamation is still important. For all the good things that we are doing for the Lord, if we fall short of proclaiming it, it's a job half done. And a job half done is a job not done. We don't want to do that. So, a quick recap. The Reformation happened in 1500s. They tossed the sodality out of the dual structure. And so in the meantime, there were the Quakers and the Moravians who were using just one chopstick to try to move forward God's mission. But it's John Wesley and the revivalists that sparked off the whole missions movement. And God has used the three eras and the four iconic figures from the late 1700s to now. I want to come back to this verse. But you're a chosen people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, God's special possession, that you may declare the praises of him who called you out of darkness into his wonderful light. Remember, the story is still unfinished. History is his story. And his story is still unfolding through God's people, you and me. We are writing what we call the threequel to the book of Luke today as we live out our Christian life. The baton of missions has come to our hands. What are we going to do with it? That's our call. That's our challenge. Father Lord, we thank you for these examples that we can learn from, both in their successes, in their failures. We as your God's people, we are called to finish the task that's still unfinished. What are we going to do with it? You will not force it on us. You love cheerful givers, and you want us to respond out of our gratitude for all that you've done through your Son, Jesus Christ, for us. We are a chosen people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, your special possession. We are called to declare the praises of the one who called us out of darkness into his wonderful light. Help us to do that, Lord. In the name of Jesus we pray.